Next we come to the theme 2 of our book, which is about kings, farmers and towns. This theme tells us the information about the early states and economies from 600 BC to 600 CE. In this age, Rig Veda was composed. Also, agricultural settlements emerged in many parts of the subcontinent. There is an evidence of pastoral population in the Deccan and also new modes of disposal of death, that is making of elaborate stone structures called megalith. This emerged in the central and south India from the first millennium BC. In many cases, it is found that the dead were buried with rich range of iron tools and weapons. So this age also signifies the emergence of iron culture, also called the Iron Age. As we saw in the last chapter, IVC, Indus Valley Civilization did not mention any iron. It was most prominently a copper age, that is a Chalcolithic age. Also, because of these iron tools, here we can notice the emergence of early states, empires and kingdom. Also, new towns appeared almost throughout the subcontinent. The sources for this era are inscription, text, coins and visual material. Here you can notice an inscription in Sanchi, Madhya Pradesh, 2nd century BC. Just about 200 years ago, we had no knowledge about what was written in these inscriptions. And then in 1830s, James Prinsep, he was an officer in the Mint of East India Company. He deciphered these Brahmi and Kharosthi scripts. These scripts were mostly used in these earliest inscriptions and coins. Knowledge of these scripts helped us understand about Ashoka. Also, these scripts gave a new direction to the investigation of early Indian political history. And also we started investigating about the connections between political changes, economic and social developments in this era. Now, what exactly are inscriptions? Inscriptions are writing engraved on hard surfaces like stone, metal or pottery, and they usually record the achievements, activities or ideas of those who commissioned them and include the exploit of kings or donations made by women and men to religious institutions. These inscriptions are virtually permanent records. We have gathered a lot of knowledge about this era by reading these inscriptions. So next we learn about the 16 Mahajanpadas. So Janpadas means the land where Jana, that is people, a clan or a tribe, sets its foot or settles. It is a word used in both Prakrit and Sanskrit. So after about 6th century BC, these early states, cities, the growing use of iron, the development of coinage, all this started. Also, we got to know from this Buddhist and Jaina text about these Mahajanpadas. Some important characteristics of these Mahajanpadas were that some were ruled by kings and others, they were known as Ganas, Sanghas, they were oligarchy, where the power was shared by the number of men, often collectively called as the Rajas. Another thing to note is that each Mahajanpada had a capital city which was often fortified. Maintaining these fortified cities as well as providing for incipient armies and bureaucracy required resources. Thus, when Brahmanas began composing this Sanskrit text known as Dharma Sutras, they encouraged the Rajas to collect taxes, tribute from cultivators, traders and artisans. And also raids on the neighboring states, they were recognized as the legitimate means of acquiring wealth. In this map highlighted in blue, we see the names of the 16 Mahajanpadas. And what is mentioned in green is the capital of these Mahajanpadas. Some important ones are Gandhara, Matsya, Avanti, Chedi, Vatsa, Kashi, Vajji, Anga, and the most important, which we shall read about, is Magad. Please pause this video and see this map carefully. So first among the 16, we shall discuss about Magad. Magad was the most powerful Mahajanpada. Many historians have explained this development in variety of ways. One of the reasons was that Magad was a region where agriculture was productive, and also iron mines were accessible, which provided resources for tools and weapons. Elephants, which were an important component of the army, were found in the forest in this region. And also Ganga and its tributaries provided a means of cheap and convenient communication. However, in the early Buddhist and Jaina texts, it is written that Magad attributed its power to the policies of individuals. The ambitious kings like Bimbisar, Ajatshatru, Mahapadmananda, they helped, and their ministers implemented such kind of policies that Magad was made a very powerful Mahajanpada. Initially Rajgriha, it was the capital of Magad. Rajgir means the house of the king. It is a fortified settlement. We can see the fortified walls of Rajgir here in this picture. And later in the 4th century BC, this capital was shifted to Patliputra, which is the present day Patna. The reason for this shift was the communication along river Ganga. So the growth of Magad culminated in the emergence of the Mauryan Empire. Chandragupta Maurya, he founded the Mauryan Empire, and his control extended as far northwest as Afghanistan. Also his grandson Ashoka, he was the most famous ruler of early India. He conquered Kalinga. Ashoka, you can remember Shah Rukh Khan. This movie you can see. This movie will help you understand how Ashoka, from a conqueror, converted to started propagating his concept of Dhamma. He was one of the first rulers who inscribed his messages to his subjects and officials on stone surfaces, which included natural rocks as well as polished pillars. In Dhamma, he included respect towards elders, generosity towards brahmanas, and those who renounced worldly life, treating slaves and servants kindly, and respect for religions and traditions other than one's own. Most of the Ashokan inscriptions were in the Prakrit language. Those in the northwest of the subcontinent were in Aramaic and Greek, and most Prakrit inscriptions were written in Brahmi script. However, some in the northwest were written in Kharoshthi. Aramaic and Greek scripts were used for the inscriptions in Afghanistan. A variety of sources were available to reconstruct the history of Mauryan Empire, which include sculpture and also valuable works like Megasthenes Indica. Megasthenes was a Greek ambassador to the court of Chandragupta Maurya. Another source which is often used is Arthashastra. It is most probably composed by Kautilya or Chanakya. He was a minister of Chandragupta. Also Jaina and Puranic literature as well as Sanskrit literary works. In all this, Mauryas are mentioned. There were 5 major political centers in their empire. The capital Patliputra and 4 provincial centers, that is Takshila, Ujjaini, Tosali and Suvarnagiri. All these are mentioned in the Ashokan inscriptions. It was likely that the administrative control was strongest in the area around the capital and the provincial centers, and these centers were carefully chosen. In this map, you can see that these provincial centers were of a well thought decision. You can see Takshila here, Ujjaini, Suvarnagiri, this place in Tosali here. Takshila and Ujjaini, they were present on this long distance trade route. Suvarnagiri was possibly important to tap the gold ores of Karnataka and Tosali to stabilize Kalinga. Communication along both land and riverine routes was vital for the existence of the empire. Journeys from the center to the provinces took weeks. Also, Megasthenes mentions a committee with 6 subcommittees for coordinating military activity. One looked after the navy, the second managed the transport and provisions, third was responsible for foot soldiers, the fourth for the horses, fifth for the chariots, and the sixth one for the elephants. Ashoka also appointed special officers known as Dhamma Mahatma to spread the message of Dhamma. So Dhamma Mahamatta. Amatta means minister. He was appointed to spread the message of Dhamma, religion. Here in this box it is mentioned about the other activities which occurred in the state. Like there were officers to superintend the rivers, to measure the land, inspect the sluices by which water is let out from the main canals into their branches, so that everyone may have an equal supply of water. These officers collected taxes and superintended the occupations connected with land, like those of the woodcutters, carpenters, blacksmiths, and the miners. So this empire was about 2300 years old. So how important was the empire, and what is its significance today? Mauryas, they were associated with the stone sculptures. These stone sculptures are considered to be the examples of spectacular art typical of empires. Also, many of these historians have found that message on the Ashokan inscriptions is very different from that of most of the other rulers. It also suggested that Ashoka was a more powerful and industrious ruler. He was also more humble than later rulers who adopted grandiose titles. Also, our nationalist leaders in the 20th century, they regarded Ashoka as an inspiring figure. Mauryan Empire lasted for about 150 years, which is not a very long time. Also, in the map, you notice that the empire did not encompass the entire subcontinent, and the control was not uniform. By about 2nd century BC, new chiefdoms and kingdoms emerged in several parts of the subcontinent. Here in this map, you can see the distribution of Ashokan inscriptions. The red triangle are the major rock edicts. We find them as far as Kandahar in Afghanistan, Mansehra, Shahbazgari, Girnar, Sopara, Sannati, Shishupalgarh, Jaugarh, and Kalsi. Minor rock edicts, the purple squares, they are much more in number. Whereas the pillar inscriptions, we can see that they are mostly concentrated close to Patliputra. So in North India, we learnt about the Ashoka the Great. In later times, and in South India, if we come, we see that the chiefdoms of Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas, they were in Tamilakam. Tamilakam is the name of ancient Tamil country which included the past present day Andhra Pradesh and Kerala in addition to Tamil Nadu. So if this is South India, here it's Kerala, this is Tamil Nadu, this is supposed to be the present Andhra. So this area was made up of Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas. So how do we get to know about them? The early Tamil Sangam text. This text contains the poems describing the chiefs and the ways in which they acquired and distributed the resources. Many chiefs and kings, including the Satavahanas, they ruled the parts of western and central India. If this is South India, so this western Maharashtra almost and Madhya Pradesh, that area is by Satavahanas. And Shakas. Shakas were the people of Central Asian origin, and they established the kingdom in northwestern and western parts of the subcontinent. I often ponder about this question, like who chooses the rulers? How rulers are chosen from among the masses? So one of the reasons mentioned here in this NCERT is that these rulers, they identified themselves with the variety of deities. Like Kushans. Kushans were the rulers of a vast kingdom extending from Central Asia to Northwest India, and their history has been reconstructed from inscription and textual traditions. So colossal statues of Kushan rulers have been found installed in a shrine at a mutt near Mathura, Uttar Pradesh. Also, some shrines have been found in Afghanistan. So this means that they indicate that they were like godlike. So also, many Kushan rulers, they adopted the title of Devputra or son of God. They were mostly inspired by the Chinese rulers who called themselves as the son of heaven. This is a Kushana coin. You see, on one side, King Kanishka is there, and on the reverse, a deity is made. So these coins are one of the indications saying that Kushanas were like god-like images. In about the 4th century, Gupta Empire emerged. This Gupta Empire, it was a very fascinating way of choosing the rulers. There were men called Samantas. They maintained themselves through local resources, including control over land. They offered homage and provided military support to the rulers. The powerful Samantas could become kings, and conversely, the weak rulers who were reduced to the position of subordination. So if you were a powerful Samanta, you would become a king. Similarly, for Gupta rulers also we have found literature, coins, inscriptions, including prashastis. These were composed in the praise of kings in particular and patrons in general. The most famous one is this Allahabad Prashasti, also called the Prayag Prashasti. It is composed in Sanskrit by Harisena. He was the court poet of Samudragupta, one of the most powerful Gupta rulers. Here in this box you can see what all Harisena wrote to praise Samudragupta. He said that Samudragupta had many qualities adorned by hundreds of good actions. He called him the Purusha, the supreme king, being the cause of the prosperity of the good and the destruction of the bad. He is one whose tender heart can be captured only by devotion and humility, possessed of compassion, giver of many hundreds, thousands of cows. His mind has received ceremonial initiation for the uplift of miserable, the poor, the forlorn, and the suffering. Resplendent and his embodied kindness to mankind. He called him equal to the gods, Kubera, the god of wealth, Varuna, the god of ocean, Indira, the god of rains, and Yama, the god of death. Here, this is a sandstone sculpture of Kushana king. This sculpture can be presently found in the Mathura Museum. You see this, it is written in Brahmi script. It is written Maharaja Raj Adhiraja Devputra Kanishka, that is, the great king, king of kings, son of God, Kanishka. Do you know about the Sudarshana Lake in Gujarat? Sudarshana Lake was an artificial reservoir. It has a rock inscription dating back to 2nd century CE in Sanskrit, composed to record the achievements of Shaka ruler Rudra Raman. The inscription mentions that the lake with embankment and water channels was built by a local governor during the rule of Mauryas. It is 300 BC around. A terrible storm broke the embankment and the water gushed out of the lake. Rudradaman, who was then ruling in the area, claimed to have got the lake repaired by using his own resources without imposing any tax on his subjects. Another inscription on the same rock, but 5th century, it mentions how one of the rulers of Gupta dynasty again got the lake repaired. This renovation of the lake is one of the example on how kings influence the perceptions of themselves in the empire. We all know what the rulers thought. We have inscription, text, coins, literary evidence, but we do not know what ordinary people felt about these rulers. However, some anthologies like Jataka tales or Panchatantra tales, they give a hint about what they thought. The Jataka tales were written in Pali around the middle of the first millennium CE. One example is this Gandatindu Jataka. It describes the plight of the subjects of a wicked king. These included an elderly women, men, cultivators, herders, village boys, and even animals. In this tale, it is written that when the king went in disguise to find out what his subjects thought about him, each one of them cursed him for their miseries, explaining and complaining that they were attacked by robbers at night and by tax collectors during the day. To escape from this situation, people abandoned their village and went to live in the forest. So, this story indicates the relationship between the king and his subjects, especially the rural population. And it could often be strained that kings frequently tried to fill their coffers by demanding high taxes, and peasants particularly found such demands oppressive, and they used to escape into the forest. Next, let us understand the strategies for increasing agricultural production. One such strategy was the shift to plough agriculture. These iron tip plowshares were used to turn the alluvial soil in the areas with high rainfall, mostly like Ganga Valley. Also, there was another technique. This is called transplantation technique. It was used for paddy cultivation. In this technique, the seeds were first broadcast, and when the saplings have grown, they are transplanted in a waterlogged field. This ensures a higher ratio of survival of sapling and the higher yields. In the semi-arid areas of Punjab and Rajasthan, the iron plowshare was not used even until the 20th century. Also, those living in hilly tracts and in northeastern and central parts of the subcontinent, they practiced hoe agriculture. This image looks like a hoe. It was used to plow the field. It was much suited to the terrain of hilly areas. Another thing which helped in the increase in agriculture production was the use of irrigation through wells, tanks, also canals. The construction of canals was often recorded in inscription by the kings. Now, as we know, these technologies led to an increase in production. The benefits to individuals were uneven. We saw emerging different classes like landless agricultural laborers, small peasants, as well as large landholders. The term Gahapati, it was used often in the Pali text to designate the second and third categories, that is, the small peasant and the large landholders. Also, the early Tamil literature, the Sangam text, they mention different categories of people living in the village, like large landowners were called as Velalar, plowmen, Ozavar, and slaves called Adimai. Here, the term Gahapati is described. It says that Gahapati was the owner, master, or head of the household who exercised control over the women, children, slaves, and workers who shared a common residence. Gahapati was also the owner of resources, land, animals, and other things that belonged to the household. Also, this term was sometimes used as a marker of status for men belonging to the urban elite, including the wealthy merchants. Now, let us understand about the land grants and the new rural elites. From the early centuries of Common Era, we know the grants of land were being made. These grants they were recorded in inscriptions. These inscriptions could be in stones or on copper. Most of the records which have survived are generally about the grants to religious institutions or to brahmanas, and the most inscriptions were in Sanskrit. In the later, like 7th century onwards, these inscriptions along with Sanskrit were also in local languages like Tamil or Telugu. Let us see about the story of Prabhavati Gupta. She was the daughter of one of the most important rulers in early Indian history, Chandragupta II. She was married to another important ruling family, that of Vakatakas, who were powerful in the Deccan. Now, according to this Sanskrit legal text, women were not supposed to have independent access to resources such as land. However, this inscription it said that Prabhavati had access to land, which she then granted. Now, this may have been because she was a queen and her situation was therefore exceptional. Also, another reason could have been that the provisions of legal text they were not uniformly implemented. In exchange of this land, the rural population, which included brahmanas as well as the peasants, they were expected to provide a range of produce to the king or his representative. Also, they would have to obey the new lord of the village and perhaps pay him all these dues. The land grants, such as these ones, they have been found in several parts of the country. There were regional variations in the size of land donated, which could range from small plots to vast stretches of uncultivated land. Now, why were these land granted? So, some feel that these land grants were a part of strategy adopted by ruling lineages to extend agriculture to new areas. Others suggest that land grants were indicative of weakening political power, as kings were losing their control over the Samantas. They tried to win the allies by making grants of land. They also feel that kings tried to project themselves as supermen because they were losing control. They wanted to present at least a facade of power. When the land was granted to a Brahmana, it was called Agrahara. The Brahmanas were usually exempted from paying land revenue and other dues to the king. They were often given the right to collect these dues from the local people. Now let us see about the towns and trade. As we remember, many capitals of Mahajanpadas, they were major towns. They were usually located along routes of communication, like Patliputra was along the riverine routes, Ujjaini along the land route. Also, some cities like Puhar, they were near the coast. Mathura was a bustling center of commercial, cultural, and political activity. Here in this box, little history of Patliputra is given. It is said that Patliputra began as a village known as Patligrama. In 5th century BC, the Magadhan rulers decided to shift their capital from Rajgraha to this settlement and renamed it. By about 4th century BC, it was the capital of Mauryan Empire and one of the largest cities in Asia. Subsequently, its importance apparently declined. In 7th century CE, when Huingsang visited the city, he found it in ruins and with a very small population. Elites and craftsperson. We have seen that kings and ruling elites, they lived in fortified cities. It was very difficult to conduct extensive excavations in today because all these artifacts, they have been mostly stolen. People live in these areas even today. But some artifacts which have been recovered are this glossy finished bowls, which are called northern black polished ware. They were probably used by rich people. Also, some ornaments, tools, weapons, vessels, figurines made of wide range of material like gold, silver, copper, bronze, ivory, glass, shell, and or even terracotta. This image, it's the gift of an image. It is present in the Mathura Museum presently. We see on the pedestal is a Prakrit inscription here. We see this Prakrit inscription. It mentions that a woman named Nagapiya, the wife of a goldsmith, that is Shobhanika, named Dharmaka, she installed this image in her shrine. As we saw in the last page, it is written here by the 2nd century BC. We find short votive inscriptions in a number of cities. These mention the name of donor, sometimes specify his or her occupation as well, and this also tells about the people who lived in towns like washing folk, weavers, scribes, carpenters, potters, goldsmiths, blacksmiths, officials, religious teachers, merchants, and kings as well. Sometimes even guilds or shrenis, that is the organization of craft producers and merchants, they are also mentioned on these votives. Votive inscription record gifts made to the religious institutions. Now let us see this map. This map shows some important kingdoms and towns of India. We see Kushanas, Guptas, Shakas, Vakatakas, Satvahanas, Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas. Do you notice that almost the area of Harappans is now vacant? The major important towns, we do not see even one in these areas. Also, we learnt that the cities, they were along the trade routes. See Patliputra along the Ganges river. We have Varanasi, Vaishali, Mathura along Yamuna, Kannauj again along the Ganges, Takshila along the Jhelum river, Sopara, it is along the sea, then Ujjaini, Puhar. These are important cities which you should know the location of. Now let us learn about how the trade in the subcontinent happened during this time. We saw that around from 6th century BC, land and river routes, they crisscrossed the subcontinent and extended in various directions. They even went to Central Asia and beyond. Those who traversed these routes included peddlers, who probably travelled on foot, merchants, who traveled with caravans of bullock carts and pack animals. They were also seafarers. They ventured with risk, but they were highly profitable. Some successful merchants, they were designated as Masatuvan in Tamil and Sethis and Satvahas in Prakrit. They could become enormously rich. They carried wide range of goods from one place to another, like salt, grain, cloth, metal ores, and even finished products, stone, timber, medicinal plants, spices, pepper, even textile, and all this was transported across the Arabian Sea to the Mediterranean. Here in this box, we see an excerpt from Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. It is composed by an anonymous Greek sailor. He says that they sent large ships to those market towns on account of great quantity and bulk of pepper and malabatrum. It is possibly cinnamon. They are imported here in the first place. A great quantity of coin, topaz, antimony, coral, crude glass, copper, tin, lead. There is exported pepper, which is produced in quantity in only one region near these markets. Beside this, there are exported great quantities of fine pearl, ivory, silk, cloth, transparent stones, and all kinds of diamonds, sapphire, tortoise shell, all this. Now, archaeological evidence of a bead making industries has been found in Kodumanal, Tamil Nadu. It is likely that local traders bought the stones mentioned in this Periplus from the sites such as these, close to the coastal ports. And just so you know, Periplus is a Greek word meaning sailing around, and Erythraean was the Greek name for Red Sea. Many people are very much fond of collecting coins. Also in UPSC, many people keep their hobby as numismatics. So it will be interesting to note about the coins of that age. The punchmark coins made of silver and copper. These were amongst the earliest to be minted and used. During the Mauryan time, it was suggested that these coins were issued by the kings. Also, it was suggested likely that merchants, bankers, town people, they issued some of these coins. But the first coins to bear the name and images of the rulers were issued by the Indo-Greeks, who established control over northwestern part of the subcontinent around 2nd century BC. The first gold coins were issued in the 1st century CE by the Kushanas. These were virtually identical in weight with those issued by contemporary Roman emperors and the Parthian rulers of Iran, and have been found from several states in North India and also Central Asia. There have been hordes of Roman coins that have been found from archaeological sites in South India. Also, coins were issued by some tribal republics like that of Yodhyas of Punjab and Haryana. But the most spectacular gold coins were issued by the Gupta rulers. They were remarkable for their purity, and they facilitated long distance transactions from which the kings were also benefited. This is a Gupta coin, pure in gold. You see, this is a Yodhya coin, the tribal republic coin. And this is an early punchmark coin, probably from the Mauryan age. We also observe that around 6th century CE onwards, the gold coins taper off. Many historians argue why it was. Some say that it was maybe because of economic crisis, that the collapse of Western Roman Empire, long distance trade declined, and this affected the prosperity of the states, communities, and regions that had benefited from it. The others argued that new towns and network of trade started emerging around this time. They also pointed out that though finds of coins of that time are fewer, coins continue to be mentioned in inscriptions and in text. Next, this topics about how the inscriptions are deciphered is not very important from the exam point of view. So we'll just glance through it in a very quick manner. Basically, how do we decipher a script is like we work backwards from the contemporary script, like comparing these letters with older specimens, and this is how a script is deciphered. It is important to know in this chapter that Ashoka, in most of his inscription, he was referred to as Devanampiya Piyadasi, that is, beloved of the gods and pleasant to behold. Also, in Mauryan Empire, there were reporters called Pativedaka who would always report the affairs of people to the king at all the times. Now, it must have been probably evident to you that there are limits to what epigraphy can reveal. Sometimes there are technical limitations, like letters faintly visible, and the reconstructions are uncertain. Also, sometimes the inscriptions may be damaged or letters missing. It's not always easy to be sure about the exact meaning of the words used in the inscription. Also, another problem was that not everything that we may have considered like politically or economically significant was recorded in these inscriptions. For example, like routine agricultural practices and the joys and sorrows of daily existence, they find no mention in the inscriptions, which focus more often than not on grand, unique events. Besides the content of these inscriptions, they almost invariably project the perspective of the persons who commissioned them. You can observe this beautiful copper plate inscription from Karnataka in 6th century CE. See how beautifully the text is engraved on this copper plate. It remains till date. Here we come to the end of this theme 2 of the second chapter. Please pause this video here, look at the timeline, try to visualize the India map and the timeline. It will give you a greater understanding of the topic. If you have any doubts, you can comment in the section, you can comment below and it will be cleared. Please revise this video again and again to memorize the concepts. Ancient history is not difficult, it just requires revision again and again and again. But the answers you will find in NCERT only. Thank you.